Welcome to today's webinar on bushfire recovery producer experiences with Glen Tilly. I'm Jodie Rizzo-O'Brien and I'm one of the Sheep Connect coordinators. Before we begin our webinar, we'd just like to acknowledge our funding bodies which support Sheep Connect South Australia, Australian Wool Innovation, the South Australian Sheep Industry Fund, Pinery Industries and Region South Australia, and today's webinar is also supported by the South Australian Murray-Darling Basin and Adelaide and Mount Lofty Natural Resources Management Boards through funding from the Australian Government's National Land Care Program and NRM levies. If you'd like to know more about Sheep Connect South Australia, you can go to our website, sheepconnectsa.com.au, or you can follow us on Twitter at sheepconnectsa. Our guest tonight to talk about his bushfire experiences is Glen Tilly. Glen's a fifth generation farmer and has been full-time farming since 1974. His property in the Tarlee Kapunda district has run a mix of cereal cropping, prime lambs, self-replacing merinos, and a couple of periods of vela production. In more recent years, Glen and his family have purchased properties at Mosquito Hill and Willow Creek on the Fleurieu Peninsula, where vela production and cattle trading have resumed. I'm just going to ask Glen to talk us through some of his experiences with the bushfire. So Glen, tell us a little bit about your farm business and the situation you experienced after the fire.
Yes, hi Jodie. At the stage of the fire, I guess at that point we were running 1,100 ewes just as a self-replacing. I think we might have had some trading ewes there as well. About 550 hectares of cropping, with some of that was on lease ground. And we had just purchased our Mosquito Hill property, which was part of our succession plan. So we'd just started to get into that process, and there we're running 30 cows. Now that Mosquito Hill property actually played a valuable role in the days after the fire. So I'll mention that later. Yes, sorry, Jerry. Yes, so it was a Pinery fire, and I guess the date as well etched into all our minds. It was November the 25th in 2015. Yes, starting over at Pinery and proceeding, I guess, southeast down towards Roseworthy, and then it had a big swing, a change, and came westerly across a lot of the Adelaide Plains. Our property was pretty much on the end of it in the Tarlee Kapunda area. It came across the cropping country and then got up into the range country, and at that stage the fire was starting to slow down, and we're basically on the northeast corner of that of the fire.
Excellent. So just tell us a bit more about the toll, what you guys experienced as a result of the fire.
We were very fortunate. We didn't lose any structural improvements. Our houses and sheds and machinery in general were pretty good. We did burn around some field bins. Did lose one machine which was in a syndicate, which by mistake had not been insured, so that was a bit unfortunate. But no, we were very fortunate. We basically lost crops, stubbles, and then our hills grazing pastures. So probably about half of our cropping and stubbles areas, we still had crops to be repped, which was another part of the aftermath. And also in our hills grazing, we would have lost about 60% of our hills grazing, which is basically native grass type country, rolling hills. So it was a big portion of that particular block.
Glen, I believe you also lost some livestock during the fire, and we can see a photo here of your hills country now.
Yes, so the losses were up in the hills. We still had ewes up there. Sometimes they were already out of the hills. We tend to run our hills very cautiously. We don't like to get the soil cover down too low. So we lost... there were nearly 90 ewes that were killed in the fire, and then we put down another 190 afterwards once we'd gone through and assessed them. Fortunately, well, if it's fortunate, fortunately, they were mostly in the older ewe mob. The younger ewes were on a different side of the block, and they managed to go to the right corner of the paddock at the time, and fortunately the fire burnt past them. So we're very fortunate there that our losses really were minimal. But obviously it's still very disappointing to lose those good breeding ewes.
Absolutely. So what sort of percentage? You said 60% of your hill country, and what about what percentage of your cropping country got burnt, Glen?
That would have been in the same range, Jodie, 50 to 60%.
Right.
Some of it, as I said, had already been repped, and then there was still some crops still to be repped. So yeah, I guess it was a balance for us. It wasn't a total wipeout, which meant we still had paddocks which were still intact, I guess, from a fencing point of view, which was very handy to us in the months ensuing.
Excellent. So following the fire, Glen, how did you handle the period immediately after the fire?
Yeah, so I guess once the dust settles, as you might say, or the smoke settles, we're still our position, because of it being hills grazing country, there was a lot of timber on there. We still had to put a fair bit of time in there, just on the containment of the fire and just monitoring flare-ups, which were happening occasionally throughout a 4 or 5 week period, but and in those initial few days afterwards, there was a fair amount of time just in the mopping up and sorting the sheep out. Obviously, that was the first priority, as well as obviously containing the fire. A lot of the country to the west of us, where the main part of the fire was the crops are burnt, paddocks burnt. It was pretty much a done deal. Very quick fire and cleaned up, whereas we, had to continue working through on the fire for a number of days and still monitoring it through for a number of weeks.
Yeah. And so what do you suggest that others in similar situations need to focus on, just in that immediate period and then over the longer term?
Well, I guess, obviously, yes, the fire is the demon you've got to contain. And the sheep obviously have got to be attended to, and unfortunately, some had to be put out of their misery, I guess, put down for various reasons, and handled. So we were looking to minimise their stress, and I guess it's very important to make sure that they are there's minimal stress to them. I think they're a little bit shocked, and also to be able to get them into areas where, or to get them back onto feed and water, so that they can, start to maintain their condition, or whichever level of condition they're in, to try and get them back to a good condition as quickly as possible. So that certainly they were our first focus. I mean, other areas of as far as our losses were pretty much put aside, it was basically containing the fire and making sure the stock were attended to and set up for the oncoming period.
And so following that initial period, how did you prioritise what needed to be done on your property?
So doing I guess, Jodie, you take an inventory really of what's been lost, what you have up your, what resources you still do have. So I guess we do use adjustment on an annual basis, so we still had that, so that was fortunate. So we did the inventory of what stock we had, what feed we had, the available paddocks we had to utilise, because that can obviously be a constraint if you've got a lot of paddocks burnt. The feed, we had hay, we still had grain to reap, so I guess we could, if necessary, retain more of that grain for future feeding needs. So those were the very initial parts, and I think what's really important and will help you significantly is if you can get that insurance sorted out as quickly as possible. Obviously, you're going to need to be spending some money in repairs and perhaps if you do need to get in food or feed resources, well, having the insurance and having that paid out is certainly very helpful to your cash flow in your business.
Great. You obviously lost quite a bit of pasture in your hill country and some of your cereals. What happened and what did you do in regard to your pasture regeneration? And did you do anything in particular through your management to assist with that pasture regeneration?
I guess I was fortunate just through the networks of producers that I associate with. We'd seen say the Eden Valley area, which is about 40 kilometres for us. There'd been a couple of fires in that area 2 or 3 years before us, and having been to one of their field days and talking to one of their a farmer, a producer that I guess I get along with pretty well, we were talking about the restocking process and came to the conclusion that they couldn't build up their stock numbers as quickly as what they'd anticipated. So they were really it was very handy to hear that assessment, and I was very quick to make that decision that we would look at the restocking side of it on a very conservative basis. So that hills area, I just thought, well, the best thing we can do is just close it up and give it a year of rest, let it recover, and I think that was a very good approach to it. It was just, I guess I was fortunate that I had that conversation with another producer who had that experience himself. So it's good to learn from others and to be able to use that for something that if you need to be in that position, you can put that to practice later on.
Mm-hmm. Glen, you talked about rebuilding your stock numbers. Do you want to give us a bit more insight into how you did that and your approach over the longer period?
Well, I guess partly because we were looking at in our succession plan of reducing or working towards retirement, we didn't look at restocking. And we'd had a number of dryish years where our springs have been tight. We'd had to go through our autumns with a lot of confinement feeding. So I just felt that instead of being hell-bent on rushing back in and restocking, we would just continue on at those numbers that we're at that point. Once again, being a bit more conservative, and it was more manageable, I think, and it put less pressure on myself by taking that approach. So that was just my own personal approach. I know a lot of people are very, want to crank up again, but I felt I'd take it at a slower pace, and as the seasons have been, I think it's probably been around. We've stocked at about the right level. We've still had to do quite a lot of confinement feeding, which is, I guess, it's a good practice, but it obviously takes time and money, like any other good practice. So I felt more comfortable the way that we've reduced our stocking level to basic, and also it's been important to be able to keep our stock in at the right condition level. And I suppose from lifetime we've learnt the importance of that. So I was able to do that pretty comfortably.
Great, thanks, Glen. So in hindsight, what are the lessons learned, and what would you extend to other producers that have just experienced bushfire?
Well, I guess one, that's really important to look after yourself. And I think, once you get through that first initial onslaught where you really are just swamped, you probably need to actually get a bit of time out. We're fortunate, having purchased that other property for our retirement, we had an escape. And it really was great to be able to just get away where you weren't surrounded by burnt ground and dust and other issues. So that was a refresher for myself, just to be able to sneak down there for a day or two and then come back and tackle the issues again. But I think it's really important to look after yourself, take a break, get your insurance sorted out, and you will get swamped with offers of help, and it's almost to the point of I wish the phone wouldn't ring. But I think you don't want to be pushed into doing things. You want to actually clear your head and start a plan and then work work through it in a methodical way and have a bit of a process, I guess, of taking it in stages. Perhaps you don't have to try and put in a massive amount right at the start. I think you should try and stage it and work through it, and perhaps bounce it around with a few others as well. Perhaps find yourself another mentor or someone who's gone through the experiences and see if they can guide you through some of those things. And we all know that we could have done it a bit better, but I think if you can perhaps just give yourself a little bit more time to sort of digest all of the possibilities and then and make your plans, I'm sure you'll come out with a better outcome. One other thing we found, or we decided on, was we had burnt crops, so there was a lot of grain a lot of grain on the ground, which obviously would have been a potential feed. There would have been some risk involved, but certainly there was potential there to utilise that. But we made it a rule that we weren't going to graze those paddocks. So we were very mindful of the soil cover. We tried to, perhaps the odd paddock that had a little patch burn off a corner. Well, we let stock in there, but really, if the paddock had been burnt, the stock just did not go in there until the break of the season or beyond. So that was really important, I think, just to have the ground rules that there's things that you make sure that you stick to as far as protecting your future resources. Our soil and our stock are our future resources, so we've just got to make sure. And looking at that, maintaining the sheep's condition was a really important factor too, Jody, really important.
Glen, did you use confinement feeding or just use your unburnt pastures, or a combination of the two? In terms of your grazing management?
Well, I guess we knew right at that point that we were going to confine and feed later. I guess a lot of the time you really don't know whether you'll put the confinement yard into practice, into use, until you sort of get later into the summer, as the condition of the stubbles wear out. Well, then you'll say, right, okay, we're confinement feeding, and perhaps one mob, maybe two mobs. As the conditions evolve, well, then you'll make those decisions. But once the fire happened, well, yes, we knew that there was going to be, a large amount of confinement feeding ahead of us. So that was just part of our resources, I guess, in our position, that we knew that we would put into practice. But as far as we wouldn't overgraze pastures, we would kick into confinement feeding. That was always the way we would address it. Would be if necessary, we wouldn't just keep flogging a paddock. We'd start the confinement feeding.
Thanks, Glen, for sharing your insight into your experiences with bushfire recovery. Much appreciated. I'd just like to finish with thanking again the people that have made tonight's webinar possible. If you've got any questions, you can submit them through to the Sheep Connect SA team, log on to our website and follow the contact links. So thank you for your time in watching our webinar, and we'll catch you next time.